Tibet has stayed relatively quiet on the protest front since the start of the Beijing Winter Games. But the relative silence marks a major change from the last time Beijing hosted the Olympics, back in the summer of 2008. After more than a decade, we look at how sentiment in Tibet has changed under the Chinese Communist Party's iron fist.
Ahead of the Beijing Summer Olympics 14 years ago, Tibet was in revolt. Deadly clashes between Tibetans and security forces made global headlines. And for weeks, monks and herders battled bullets and batons. But today, Tibet has fallen silent, even as the Olympic Games come to Beijing for a second time. The reason is that in many ways, Beijing's plan to tame Tibet is working. Older Tibetans have resigned themselves to being part of China after decades of struggle. Younger Tibetans are split. Some still secretly long for independence, while others call themselves proud Chinese citizens. Abroad, activists find their calls falling on deaf ears as China uses its economic might to punish countries and companies that voice support for Tibet. Ever since China's army marched into Tibet in the 50s, Beijing's harsh controls have prompted Tibetans to demand autonomy, causing severe crackdowns. As the first Beijing Olympics approached in 2008, the cycles of protest and clampdown in Tibet accelerated, leaving over a dozen killed by protesters. And state security forces opened fire on demonstrators. Among the protesters was Tsewang Dondup, a Tibetan who was shot by officers after rushing forward to aid protesting monks and nuns. He lives in Canada after he fled Tibet in 2012.
I took part in those protests because I felt that the struggles that my family, my parents struggle, and the struggle that I was facing shouldn't be passed on to my children.
After the 2008 Olympics, Beijing launched a sweeping campaign, looking to control the hearts and minds of Tibetans. Billions of dollars have been poured into airports, highways, schools, and other construction in Tibet. Electricity and subsidized healthcare have come to vast swaths of the region. But with jobs and investment comes stepped-up security and surveillance, aimed squarely at Tibetans.
We're in an era of China having ethnic profiling as its basic principle of policing and of management of society.
Robert Barnett, a Tibet expert in London, says phones and the internet have become tools to monitor and control. Those who speak up about the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader in exile, find their movements restricted. Some are placed under house arrest or imprisoned. In Drago County, authorities demolished a 100-foot-tall Buddha statue last year and forced residents to watch. Though Tibetan dissidents still smuggle news and images out of the region to fight back the communist regime, though doing so comes at great personal risk.
I can say there is not a single Tibetan in Tibet who wants to live under the Chinese state.
Most Tibetan children are now sent to boarding schools, studying mainly in Chinese. The teaching of Tibetan, their mother language, has been sharply curtailed. But memories of the Chinese Communist Party's suppression and the struggle Tibetans have faced in keeping their cultural identity have begun to recede into the past. Many young urban Tibetans have adopted Han Chinese manners and attitudes. In the Tibetan quarter of Chengdu City, where tens of thousands of Tibetans live, Chinese Communist Party officers armed with pikes and batons stand sentry, while police lights flash red and blue. Checkpoints and cameras line the roads, but residents seem to pay little heed. Many young Tibetans are forging a new bicultural identity without challenging Beijing's rule.
I'm a true Tibetan. I'm very proud to be Tibetan, and I love my ethnic culture. But at the same time, I'm a true Chinese. There's no conflict between these things.
This Tibetan dance teacher lives in Chengdu. She speaks flawless Mandarin and calls herself a devout Buddhist. She's one of many young people who have found a way to live under Beijing's watchful gaze without challenging the communist regime's rule.